Call order, roll call.
Director Alaska,
Here.
Director Shirley. Here. Director Pete,
Here.
you have a forum.
Any public, is there any public out there?
I show no members of the public.
I have one election officer, the committee chair for the 2023. I'll nominate myself.
I was gonna say, can I move that Leo continues a fabulous job as chair of the finance committee?
Yes, that's unanimous, so that was our roll call. Approve the January 4th, minute, committee minutes. Any comments on that?
No comments.
All in favor of approving, say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Update on budget planning. Provide direction to staff. Who's got that?
Thank you, Chair. I'll start off with a little introduction to budget planning. As we prepare for budget planning, we are seeking a little bit of guidance around some items that we want to entertain as we start preparing the budget. The first one being speaking with our philosophy, really looking at our price adjustment at the gate rate level. And is there any subsequent other items that we would want to address at this time? And one of them would be the C&D material that's coming in, and also probably the greenways. We want to really take a good look at them to make sure that we're at a point of equity for the ratepayer, and also preparing our budget and just showing what our revenue streams are. We also taken a big approach in my first year when we set the budget is to narrow down the gap, and I believe Garth really done a really good job of narrowing down our revenue that streams that are coming in. And we're not gonna beat our budget by 20 million. We are looking to project ourselves to be within plus or minus 5% of our budget targets going into this year, which is starting to give us real indicators of where we want to address some of the concerns of our operations. And so at this point, we're a little early, but we will be looking at a projection number for at least the gate rate increase pretty soon here, as Pebble Beach is the first community services district that goes on the tax roll. So knowing that number is pretty critical to their position in getting and preparing their tax roll, and then it leads to everyone else, including Monterey County, I think is second on the list as they start preparing their fiscal impacts to disposal component. And so last year we proposed a 7%. At this year I don't have a number yet. And 7% when we looked at the scale, Carmel by the Sea had the biggest increase for residential because they had the highest rate service rate fee that was applied to, which is about 80 cents on 7%. So at this point we'll look at a few indicators that we know are existing. Is the CPI and rate index is probably around 4.5% at this point. But we also probably want to take a look at indicators of the inflation costs. What is our equipment increases? What are our fuel increases? So we'll be taking an approach on that as a big item for introducing our first pass. We'd like to get our draft in April, and then really get a final moved in May, and with an approval in June, and then implementation in July, and not fall behind on the schedule for doing this. The other item that we have that's on the horizon as well is the position of where are going to be going into labor negotiations for the LSC unit, which is the majority of the MRF employees and frontline employees there. And we will be looking at probably a living adjustment for them on top of the CPI. And really it's looking at how can we bridge the gap of the living adjustment that exists for this area in comparison to their rate paying. This will help us distinguish a couple of things as we go into the next negotiation. Is one, the CPI adjustments that we gave for the first group, if they exist here, and this one would be CPI. The difference in this one is we would take a quick look at the living adjustments, and this is the only group that is challenged with the living incomes that exist for Monterey County and its region. So we will be taking a good look at that as we prepare our budget. Is where are we prepared to take a position on with our union negotiations and the out-of-seat union, which is our biggest union. And there is disparity, but I also acknowledge that we can't fix it all in one swoop, but I think we'd take a good effort to really look at a living adjustment coming attached with the CPI for the out-of-seat unit. And that's what I have currently. We're starting to work on it. I wouldn't mind hearing from Helen and from Garth on any items.
Can I ask a question first? We've been kind of over budget on revenues since the start of the year. Have you projected on, do you expect that trend to continue?
Yeah, I think we're gonna probably stay on the same track.
Okay. So how much of that over budget could be applied toward some of the things that you're talking?
I think we'll have an ability to really look at what that impact to the reserves that we created last year, how much will go there, and then is there any desire for any additional reserve items that we would have for closing or post closure, so that we could start making those determinations in the budget. So that's a great question. We will look at what is the surplus, what is going into the reserves, and then we can come back with a good number. But I think it's really looking at position from the board of what's really going to be important for the board, in addition to the items that we need to operate.
The labor negotiations, they're gonna be going into, the least we can expect is they're gonna get a B2, based upon what you gave the last one. So that's kind of a given. Is that a big number?
Currently, right now, what I'm seeing is that the CPI is trending to go down slightly. So from the December to December is 4.88, whereas last time was in April was 5%. So it's kind of trending and staying close to that area. However, we're looking at the Monterey living wages, which is showing that you need to have $32 an hour for just to pay rent. And so we're thinking or discussing about the possibility of doing that plus the CPI. We have not gone far enough to do that at this point yet.
So all of this,
Yeah, keep in mind that this unit is the lowest paying unit we have. They're like 15.20 per hour or something to that effect, starting. So,
And that's our largest group.
and it is our largest group, and they are the workhorse, really. So,
That's kind of getting to Leo's question of that group.
Yeah.
What dollar value do their compensation represent, and their thus give perspective of how much the increment of increase.
I don't have that number on the top of my head, but
you mentioned that last time around, we did a 7% increase in the tipping fee. And that affected, it's based upon your 7% of what you're paying now. So if you have like Carmel's got a lot of extra stuff that they throw on their garbage bill, so therefore the dollar amount for them is actually 7% of the bigger number.
And that was 80 cents a month impact to the Carmel resident.
What was a horror?
And the other member agencies were at lesser amount.
Yeah, Bill, just to explain what they were talking about, the timing. We pay our sewer bill, I mean, sewer, garbage, other stuff is taxed on our property taxes. And we pay that once a year. Our garbage bill, for example, is paid with our property taxes. So in order to get the property tax rolls adjusted, that has been done earlier, because that's a different process than driving across the scale.
Missouri One Water wants to put the sewer charges on their tax rolls as well.
It's kind of a difficult process. to do that. You gotta go through.
There'll be,
It would require an approval of.
there'll be quite a bit of resistance to that.
That'd be electric, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's a utility.
Okay, anyhow,
Yeah.
so you're sort of kind of eyeballing that 7% number again?
No, actually, I'm not. I'd like to dig into the numbers, so we'll come back with an update. You know, last year what we did is we projected a number. And we distributed that number before it got approved in our budget number as the worst case scenario that we would, it was highly unlikely that I would bring a number to the board and the board would say, no, it's not 7%, it's 12%. It would likely revert to a lower number, if not that number. And we'll request the same thing once we get to a number let us do the pen and paper work first, and we'll come back and give another update, and then we can release what the number hypothetically would be represented on our budget and being brought to the board for.
How about, every year we always have a bunch of stuff like piece of equipment we couldn't buy or a capital project we didn't quite get to. Is that a big number this time around? What do you think it'll be a carryover of capital?
We did have one early purchase, which
That's right.
we had the D9 purchase was 2.1 million. Jay's working currently now on a capital schedule that will look at all the vehicles that we have and what's in the pipeline and what's projected for this next year. So we'll come with a capital number as well. A projection on.
We have the vendors of the orders we have out there, when can we expect delivery? And it's gonna be right at the end of Q2. So it's gonna be right at that cutoff date for this year versus next fiscal year. It's gonna be close.
I got a pickup in my name, probably, when I got washed in the ocean.
And the other item when you're bringing up capital is gonna be the capital projects list, and that's
Yeah.
gonna be very important as well. We have quite a few projects that are moving down the line, and maybe Guy, you want to speak to a few of those items of what we're looking at projection for capital projects that are coming in this next fiscal year or the remaining of this fiscal year.
I think the general trend with heavier vehicle equipment and construction projects is that there has been an increase in cost in those two groups. And the district hasn't been incurring many costs in those groups in the last couple of years. So we're expecting to see higher prices and thus requesting higher budgets. One of the GM comments for this meeting is that Model 7 project, that was phase 3, which is in bidding right now. We're expecting a need for additional budget for that project. It's the base liner system for the module.
Increase the budget for next year.
Certainly for next year, but it it's probably, it may bleed into a little bit to this year, but I think it'll primarily affect the July, August spend. And July, August, September, so it'll primarily be in next year's budget. But we need to identify that before the board has the opportunity to consider the construction bids and award a contract.
Last question, the preliminary budget, what's the timing on that? Anticipate?
Garth?
Well, we'll probably be looking at a preliminary budget in April.
April.
For a question, you mentioned post-closure funds. I know we obviously established our, solidified our reserve funds. I don't think we've started any kind of.
No.
To start a discussion. Is that something that?
We may want to entertain it. We're gonna take a look at our financials and see what it's looking like through the crystal ball when we start planning for the next fiscal year. But I would be encouraged that if we have the opportunity to start supporting some of these future expenses that we'll incur, and starting early with smaller portions that we can contribute and still run our operations without having to worry what's being pushed to a reserve. I think that we will see this come back to the committee here and then taken to the full board at some point.
Is there some guideline or standard for when landfills should start planning or something like that? I feel like it's like a kid that's about to go off to college, but they're an infant now, but you have to plan, you know, so.
Your 130-year crystal ball.
Right.
Yeah.
Fortunately, there's not a common standard, that,
That's my
that-
question, is there other activities that, given a long lifespan of when do you really start foreclosure? Accumulation of funds?
well, it varies between, privately held, or even within privately held group of facilities, that the companies take different approaches. Um, my former employer, Waste Management, it starts day one. You know, whether it's day one of their ownership or day one of their, of the landfill, they start accruing. So they're accruing the entire time. While other privates, and certainly many of the publics, they tend to not be accruing as fast, or if at all, until later points in time. And so that's what the district's experience has been, is that they've maintained a pledge of revenues since 1965. And there's a small
Just small amount.
small amount that's been accumulated in a different account, but it is small, and you know, generally it's beneficial to make small incremental deposits over time,
Right.
as opposed to engaging on the liability when it's larger at a later time, because it has more cost impacts at that later time. And the customers aren't sharing that later expense, you know, in the preceding time. So this is really one of those areas where it's benefits to have a broad base that's contributing to the liability at a lesser amount for a longer time.
Yeah.
Assuming that the inflation rates and value of money stays relatively the same or creeps up slowly, but when you're saving or banking 2023 money for 100 years out, 100 years out, that your $20,000 would be 15 cents.
Yeah, my recollection on rates in the private sector were that these accrual rates typically were less than $5 at the time. And that was generally a combination of closure and post-closure, so.
It's what I've seen in several industries is they kind of apply the same way they would do the CalPERS termination liability. So they would do that in conjunction with that. There is a vehicle for the CalPERS where you can put it into a trust. However, there is no vehicle for the closure and post-closure where you can earn interest, and it's just fully restricted for that purpose. Whereas if you put it in a trust for the CalPERS, you cannot pull that money out for anything but CalPERS.
But could we, to protect ourselves from future inflation, is there some kind of a fund, interest-bearing fund that would sort of keep us even with whatever we were putting away?
That would take an investment management. portfolio that we can probably look at. The only vehicle the board has right now is really just to restrict the funds. And for that specific purpose, and that's the reserve that's gonna be coming up as a request to set up a reserve for that.
Okay. Sure, we talk about this over the next 130 years. Sure, yeah. Bill, yeah.
I think it's a good idea. I think, Helen, you alluded to post-closure is the closure of the current landfill. And then I think you said after post-closure, which would be the creation of a new landfill, so I
No,
assume.
Closure is just actually closure, and then the post-closure is after the landfill is closed, there's still.
Oh, maintenance of the area, okay,
There's a 30-year.
well, that's a cost that is being incurred. You know, whether we like it or not, right, it's for the current customers, and are the current customers paying for that cost and creating a fund in which we prepare for that expense makes a lot of sense to me.
Anything else on this item?
Nothing else?
Just add, this is something that should have been done when the landfill first opened, and so it's not something that's so far into the future, you know, we can't even think about it. That's my thought.
Yeah, and my only comments is the appreciation for the group to have the consideration for some of that liability that exists. That we haven't really focused on, and this, not only this committee, but the board has really done a really good job of identifying the importance of that, and so has staff has done a really good job of giving the background that we require to try to make this decision. So as long as we don't impact our in the black by doing these reserves, I think that we should continue to do that. We continue to build a momentum where the gate rate the philosophy should be the gate rate is what is our most consistent revenue, and it's really difficult to blend in our recycle revenue with that number and it stay constant because the recycle market goes up and down. And as Garth has explained in his reviews monthly, is we're not at the same place, but some of the other permanent our more consistent revenue is base is still consistent there, and it actually supersedes the losses of the revenue. But that's our challenge with revenue stream, is that we have the impulse of the market for recycling revenues, and what's consistent is what really holds all of the glue together for our organizations and its different operations. That recycling revenue contributes when it can, but there's times that it's not, and can we operate on just that gate rate funding that we get through the gate rate? So those will be considerations we take into effect, that the appreciation goes out to the continued support to make sure that we're teetering all the aspects that we have to deal with, which for today's current expenses, also looking at the projection of the needs of this organization, and that there's other items on the list. We need a water solution going into the following year. There's been a lack of a solution for water here that we'll take into consideration into our budgets and our projects. And the other is, land assessment. We're at capacity of our land usage, and we're trying to use the pieces that are in between. But we could really use, if land is cheaper now than it will be 100 years from now, it may be in the best interest for us to procure that and look at the avenues that we can get land. But those discussions need to be carried a little bit further. But there are items that we definitely want to identify in our budgets that we may trek to see some of these things through, if they're important enough to the group and to the board, once we can take a preliminary budget to them. So we take a lot of different approaches this year, and what is important enough to chase now, and really solidify a pathway to get those completed, because there's so many projects that are going on. And we really got to mitigate and choose which ones are the best for our organization and which ones represent our strategic plan for the next 8 years. So I have the appreciation to everybody that's participated in last year's budget and the execution of it and getting around and being ahead going into this year as well. Thank you for your guys.
Yeah,
It's just, I'm sorry, we're still on item three. You're asking, are there any other
Yes.
discussion? Okay, thank you. So, yeah, thank you. The comment about, I think you started off with a philosophy for the gate rate. And so, and this comes back to me as a district policy as to what should be the gate rate for the various, material streams. Right? So if there was a policy, a written policy indicating what should be the revenue for each material stream, the type of material stream and where it comes from, does it come from inside the district, the members, or outside the district? And I'm just still, obviously, there's a great deal of financial information. It's impressive. The budget, obviously, I can, at this point, only scratch the surface of it. But I'm still trying to understand, there's parts of the organization, the revenue stream is supporting other parts, right?
Sure.
Right, if you take each component individually, it's not self-supporting. And so when you say philosophy, I'd like to turn that into a policy that says, okay, you know, the district is would like to recoup, you know, this percentage of our revenue. And maybe it's, you know, it would be a gain from the landfill. That will subsidize the operations at the MRF, for example. Or the composting yard. And so I don't have that information in front of me. I would like to understand that, and I think a policy would allow us to discuss how to set. You know, for you to set the rates for each of these material streams and sources of the material streams.
I think the reality is that the revenue streams are need-based. So each type of material that comes across the gate has a different price tag associated with processing it. So that's what sets the rates. The rate for one thing is maybe different than the other thing because of the time and energy it takes to process it. So it's really okay, how much money do we need and therefore, and how are we gonna get it is kind of the question, as opposed to having it fixed on some kind of policy.
Well, you said that the gate fee, or implied that the gate fee is set based on the expense of handling that material, right? I haven't seen that. If there's a document that describes that, I'd love to see that. I suggested earlier a fee study. And I haven't seen any fee studies.
It changes over time. People get raises and pay, you know.
Yeah,
people-
yeah, well,
Equipment costs more, you know, it's a floating number.
sure, I agree. So all you can do is at one point in time.
Yep.
Assess what is the cost of handling a type of material. And then compare that to what the revenue stream is for that material. Obviously, it could either be a gain for the organization or it could be at a loss,
I think
right?
that's what they do.
I'm
They set the fees based upon the
Who's
cost of
saying?
the process.
I guess I haven't seen anything like that.
I will work my best with Garth and Helen to develop how we've gotten to some of the rate structures. I also seen a document from, I believe, 2007, where the board had the philosophy or the policy implemented. And I'll look for that document, and it really shows that they wanted to have a 25% reserve And they also wanted to have a minimum of $1 increase at the gate rate, but it doesn't do what you're looking for. It's what exists in the existing policy, but we could look to cater something based on how we put the budget this year. But I think to Leo's point, we may see us revert to that policy and see some extraordinary changes that may happen in operation that we may not capture in the policy to be a 1-for-1 every year. It's not that simple because of the multiple streams and the different operations, but we do look at operations independently in the budget to see what those expenses are by department and what kind of revenue that department is generating. And we have departments that have 0 revenue generation. We have HHW, all we do is receive the material and then we have to pay for it to be disposed of properly. And they don't create no revenue. The revenue is created at the gate rate, so that expense is dispersed over the gate rate.
Yeah, I guess I haven't seen that. I mean, in the budgets, if, here's, administration, here's engineering, here's HR, but I haven't seen the distribution of the expenditures of those departments back allocated to what percentage goes to operation of the MRF, to the landfill, to the compost.
I'd like to spend a little bit more time with you, maybe separate of this discussion here, which is sharing what we review every week, every month, that we get our financials distributed, which is the breakdown of that. But we get it when we put our budget together. We don't put it together independently and present a budget for operations and a budget for site crew and a budget for HAW. We create the budget, which is the global budget for everyone, with all those inputs being inputted. So we don't distribute every department out. It's available, but we don't distribute it out every month. But we do look at it.
If you have that information, I appreciate it, and that would help me with the comment about, well, what are the expenses associated with a 1 ton of material that goes to the landfill, or 1 ton that goes to the MRF?
And we currently are working on a project, Helen, Garth, and David and I, we're mapping all the material, how it flows to the facility. And the end game is to get exactly what you want. What's our cost per ton to process some through landfill, through the MRF, through the transfer station, through C&D. So we'll have that and it'll be updated. I mean, there's a need for it. We need the updated costs, and that'll help us with the budget.
Mr. Beck?
I would suggest that this be part of the budget discussion as we, a precursor to the budget.
I agree.
And then all of the board has the same information and understanding. Simplistically, historic past practice has been a global approach for rate setting, not setting a rate for a specific activity individually, for that activity. It's a global rate consideration. And simplistically, if you think about how the district began here at the site in 1965, there was a landfill for disposal services. And that was essentially the activity that was occurring at the time. And so that was the revenues, essentially 100% of the revenue was from disposal was from the disposal services. And 90%, I'm guessing here, 90% of the costs or expenses were related to the disposal activity. That has evolved, over time to have all these different services that exist here today. And the trend has been that the disposal revenues are becoming a lesser and lesser percentage component of supporting those other services. And those other services are gaining revenue, that's not relying on the disposal revenue to maintain that service. So it's been an evolution and it's, that's what the board directed staff to do in 2005 and led to all those different revenue approaches, that were developed and implemented, since then. So it's got high levels.
Well, I think you bring up an excellent point. One thing that I would, about the amount of landfill has decreased and the district is more focused on, or has increased focus on recyclables. So, so if it's not too much trouble, I know you have the information in the 5-year forecast. I'd like to see a forecast of the amount of materials by source and by type of material coming in. And that'll, I don't know if anyone else is interested, but that'll help me understand where the district is going in the future. And it should, I would expect it would show maybe our landfill amounts over the next 5 years going up, staying the same, are they going down, recyclables going up and going down? We may not charge for, say, green waste. But if the materials coming in are, if the amount of materials coming in over 5 years sure does impact the expenditure line. And the recyclables keeps going up and the revenue is zero. And so
Yeah.
if you have that, I know the 5-year forecast budget is only dollars. But if you have that information about the amount of materials.
It's difficult, but how many material types do we have at the gate rate card?
You have 20 different rates. Maybe there's some way it's just a high level. And I would just look at it as I've heard at the board level talked about, landfill disposal, C&D, green waste and
Yeah, we certainly can do the higher.
single stream.
Yeah, so probably the higher quantity items in there, because we do an aggregate of,
Yeah.
we have special ways, we have a tons of code, so. Just realize that that's probably another reason why there's the global approach, because we have so many components. When we see it from a high level, we think trash, green waste,
Yeah,
recyclables, right? The big three, we would call them. So I think we could probably capture the big three and say where we're at. And then we could have a component, which is all the other codes just kind of jammed in together, which is, construction and demolition. You have a whole bunch of subset of categories that we have in there that represent a stream. Maybe we don't capture those independently and we just kind of forecast those together.
I think that would be perfect. And the board should only be thinking the major categories and leave it to the professionals to handle the rest.
Okay.
And
There's,
there's,
we gotta move on here. We got 55 minutes, we gotta be out of here. You got enough information on the budget?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Consider litter abatement, MOU with Monterey County.
Hi, thank you, Chair. I can make this pretty short. We received a request from the County of Monterey for an extension with an amendment to an existing MOU to extend our litter abatement funds that we are providing the county. We and as Salinas Valley Recycles contribute to roadside cleanup, as well as illegal dump sites and making sure those are cleaned up in the county. And so we are requesting a 2-year extension to this MOU in the amount not to exceed $25,000 to support contracted services through Smith and Wright that the county
Contract
provides.
for what, year?
For $25,000 for the per year, excuse me.
What are we paying now?
We are paying now with the MOU is also for 25,000 and last year they spent the full 25,000. The previous year they only spent 12,000.
2-year extension, same price.
2-year extension, the same price. And this is one of, I would say, 3 activities that we do to support illegal dumping and litter abatement cleanup in our area.
I was-
Sounds okay to me.
Yeah.
So,
No discussion.
okay,
Thank you.
it's a, do the right, so I had a K to do the right thing.
I'll bring it to the full board. Thank you.
So there's gonna be an amendment of the existing agreement to extend it.
Correct.
It's a formal amendment, I mean, a formal agreement.
Yeah.
It's a formal agreement, that is correct. There's no substantial changes other than the dates to the actual agreement.
We'll get the formal over for you to review before you actually sign.
Yes,
And the county did, I think they did volunteer to put it together.
they're putting it together and their legal's currently reviewing
Okay,
it.
so we're gonna put it on the board agenda for this month.
Correct.
That's right, okay. Thanks. The budget planning is previous item, there's nothing that will be taken to the board relative to that.
No.
Number 5, update of joint feasibility study for gas waste processing, grids, and all other stuff.
That's me. This is the joint feasibility study between Monterey One Water and ReGen Monterey. And the update is, well, here's a kind of the vision of the project, just as a reminder, it is a study where we are jointly investigating opportunities that may exist between the 2 agencies in collaboration.
Covering all 3 of those activities. All 3, organic waste, microgrids, renewable energy, or are they separate?
No, they're together in the vision. They're subcategories, so to speak. But the general intent is to evaluate opportunities to improve efficiency of operations, resiliencies of operations, sustainability of operations, by considering the highest and best use of the waste and the waste byproducts that the 2 agencies have.
Is it different than the next item like the code digestion?
They're interrelated, and that represents one of the challenges in communicating accurately to the board and to the directors and to anyone about the project. There's similar topics, and I'll present those to you in the next presentation. But in general, this is a study where we're evaluating opportunities. It's not building anything, it's not designing anything, it's not permitting anything. It's a study to evaluate highest and best use of waste and waste byproducts, and that their use can be in generating power, and that's why the microgrid is part of the discussion.
The people we hired to do the study, they're doing it.
They are starting it. Yep, they have recently been.
That's like $500,000 bucks. Expensive study, right?
It is, and that was a reduced scope to get that cost down. So there were elements of the study that were deferred.
How far along are they on the study?
We just finished our field tours and the equipment assessment in January. So that was kind of the field kickoff meeting. December was the initial kickoff meeting.
Remind me, when is the study due?
It's
You said
It's projecting to July, but that's an aggressive schedule. But that's what everyone's working under, is try to meet that schedule.
any problems so far?
Well, it's there's challenges around communicating. The desires of each agency.
Remind me again who's in charge? We're co-leading this thing with the Monterey Water.
Right, there is a coordinator, Gary Darling, who was, is filling in the interim, is filling the role that the director had, the microgrid director. And so he reports to the two general managers and then to the ad hoc committees. I'm the lead for ReGen, and Tamsin McNary, the AGM for Monterey One Water, is their lead. So together with the coordinator and Black and Beach, a consultant we hired as to help represent staff. That's the management structure of the consultant. And GHG is the consultant.
On a practical basis, you get together every now and then and talk, or everybody works independently, or how does that work?
We're just starting off, and everyone's been together on meetings. The initial kickoff meeting, included the GMs and staff. And then the subsequent meetings are working at staff to consultant level.
Horrible.
It's multifaceted, and we as staff have yet to, I think, depicted the intricacies of the study to the boards, but that is an endeavor we are working on now that we have the consultant on board, is to provide a summary with a little more clarity about what all is entailed in the study, but it's basically evaluating organics and potentially energy generation from organics, and then the microgrid and and energy sustainability, energy reliability, being able to function without utility power, which is what the microgrid would represent.
So that's just sources and uses of potential energy.
Right, it's load prediction, usage of electricity, that prediction versus, what generation it will supply that need. But even in that topic of microgrid, the study is evaluating just the two facilities as a small version, and then it's going to be looking outside the two facilities as see what the potential for a more localized the microgrid might mean to the two agencies.
For example,
Ramco, or they have the farming, they have 4 deep wells. They're be an interested customer who be interested in a slightly lower.
but we're not going into that outside. You're dealing with this, just the two agencies right now, what they can do.
Yeah, we're doing a study to investigate these possibilities.
Got it.
And so, the purpose of that is to be able to describe those possibilities to the board if there's a business case for any one of them.
Okay.
On the grants side, there's a US EPA grant that M1W was awarded. Last year, and that will be around organics processing in the wastewater treatment plant. So kind of co-digestion of organics. The feasibility study scope of work will accomplish the grant scope of work. So that's 1-to-1. That grant will be completed as part of the feasibility study. This feasibility study is much larger than that grant. But I want to be clear that there is
But the grant is only covering their part of it.
that's correct.
We're paying all of our part.
Well, the grant funds is paying for the that part of the study. So not ReGen.
Okay. What's it costing us in real money, not counting grants and stuff?
The overall, or
No, yeah, well, maybe the study. How much real dollars are we putting into this stuff?
we're putting in about $500,000.
450,000.
Leo, there have been periodic meetings of the ad hoc committee. And that representing the district is Jason, Jerry, and Wendy on that ad hoc committee, and Felipe and the others have big presentations, had Zoom meetings to keep them up to date.
So they're protecting our interests.
Yeah.
Good. Good.
We also have the joint study has been awarded some additional hours from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. 40 hours of technical review. So we're, that's a subject matter expert that's providing, information to the agencies and to the consultant. So that's helps on reliability of information and completeness.
The expectation of after the completion study is that either us alone or us in conjunction with Monterey One or them alone will do something.
Right, the expectations are there may be need for a phase 2 of studying certain things. There may be opportunities for one or the other agency to pursue a project immediately. And there may be information of an opportunity where the two together pursue a project. So those are definitely foreseeable.
We've been talking about the microgrid for a long time. It makes a lot of sense. We're here, maybe it's gonna be conjoined in some way, energy wise. Initially, I thought it was just a technical problem. How you wire two organizations together in a meaningful way. But I think we're going beyond that now, kind of increasing the scope of that for something more than just hooking us together.
Potentially, that's the study aspect, is if there's an opportunity for a larger microgrid, as an example, that includes desal for Cal-Am, should that ever be present next door, or development by Marina Coast Water District on the other side of our property, and serving a neighbor like Ramco or possibly Dole. If that's a local microgrid and there are benefits to having those partners in a microgrid for the two agencies, then staff felt that the board ought to know about those opportunities, because that's distributing costs to multiple parties. And that will reduce the agency's, unit rate of cost.
Right now, you have no reason to believe there's any problems associated with conducting the study going on. Well, it could be supposedly.
Yeah, the technical aspects are, pretty straightforward. It's the partnership. It's the human factor that around people collaborating that usually present more challenge.
How long do you think it's gonna be before we have meaningful information coming from this study that we'll be able to share with the other board? Full board?
You think we'll have some preliminary?
I'm saying
May?
July. I'm saying July, August timeframe is, we'll see the result, and it's an aggressive approach.
It's a complicated subject.
Yeah, but we've been really aggressive. We're meeting on a weekly technical aspects. We had the kickoff, we had the whole crew of engineers here walking the facility, doing the site tour. They did the same thing at Monterey One Water. So now there are starting to see the infrastructures that exist at both agencies, that they can start really complying, their feasibility aspect of it. So this is just an update with information that we're working through. We're expecting results in July and August. To Guy's point, we may need to see a second study around items that may be of interest to us because of the business case that's developed. And we may also see a direct injection where we feel like, hey, do we need to start a design and build phase of any of those aspects that we could take at that time. But until we see it, we don't know what it is. You talk about microgrid and connecting at the joint. We're already in an agreement. When I entered into this agency, you guys already had approved the medium voltage transmission line to the purification plant. So that is, I want to say it's a 10-year agreement to provide electricity over to Monterey One Water. So that is already a step that we're endeavoring in a microgrid process in advance to feasibility. Feasibility, what it's going to do is going to really say that is the best approach that you can use for that energy, or it's going to say, you could have had a different pathway to do something else that may create a better interest for the organization. But I think it's really important that we capture these projects independently along the way, because we don't want to create a confusion of what projects are existing and will come online versus what we could expect from feasibility as well, because feasibility is a concept, but it's kind of a concept that's been proven through the history that we kind of see that why shouldn't it work? We're just trying to see, are those the best scenarios that will work for us before we start building and constructing, which is important.
This slide will help elaborate the interrelationships among other topics, or of the topics. But if you remember at last board meeting, Jason, I think, made a comment that he was troubled by the name feasibility study. And this is what we're calling this, is a feasibility study, because he believes that these things are feasible. He's right. There's technical solutions that are feasible. Whether those are worthy business cases we don't know. And that's what we're trying to do, is investigate these options to develop meaningful recommendations for business cases to improve the operations and reliability and sustainability of one or both agencies. So that's the study. And the study should be differentiated from projects. Projects are real. They need to be designed, they need to be permitted, they need to be constructed. And to Felipe's point, which is the last bullet on this slide, is that, we have an existing project to connect our generated power to one of the M1W's facilities, the AWPF. That the board approved the construction contract to Anderson Pacific for that. And more recently approved some design modifications so we can make that design have microgrid functionality. So that project's on a trajectory to deliver a small microgrid to the two agencies. The study is still going to study microgrids. It's going to study the expansion of that connection to the other two facilities that M1W has. At a minimum, that would represent the small microgrid option. But they're going to look at a larger microgrid option in addition to that, but that's under a study, not under a design or a commitment to do. We're committed to make this connection, and we're modifying it to include functionality to be able to island operate by itself should the utility not deliver power. And you know, we have excess power that we'll have to turn off if an island mode is needed, because right now that excess power goes to the utility, and when the utility opens up, there goes the demand. You have to drop generation to match the demand, and the demand will only be
Plus they only pay us peanuts for power.
right. Right. And so by making the connection in this project, our power is going to that facility first, and we're being paid 3 peanuts instead of 1. Also, you know, this is a related activities slide related to the study. The board last month approved the general terms for the biochar pilot study. It's you know, that pilot study is going to happen here, you know, if an agreement is approved, and that information will be gathered here. Separately, that information will be provided to this study consultant, and they're studying biochar for the purposes that align with the pilot study, as well as for treating biosolids. And so one of the I think benefits of adopting the Citrus Group pilot study is we get site-specific information that, you know, is site-specifically reliable, and we can cross-reference to how the consultants are evaluating the opportunity and see if there's alignment or if there's some challenges that exist between the two data sets. There's a M1W received an award of a calorie cycle co-digestion grant, which is the next agenda item. But that
Are we done with this?
I can jump right off of this if you like. Sure.
Well, before we do that, on the study, any questions?
I've been impressed for some time on the openness of the district to evaluate and embrace new technology and to change as and adapt to availability of new technology and implement it. So this is a good feasibility study.
Okay. Now you're doing number 6.
Mhm.
Okay, great.
Yeah, you don't want me to start this one off?
No, it's okay. There'll be a point here to jump in.
Okay.
It's kind of the setup. All right. Again, that's the vision of the what's called the microgrid, but it's, you know, it's inclusive of organics, evaluation of organics to energy, processing organics. the district has organics in the form of food waste, yard waste. The food waste is in the trash. It's also collected separately at certain commercial locations. Monterey One Water has organics in the liquids that come to their plant. And so they process those. Those are a relatively small percent solids. When you begin to talk about food waste, we're talking about a solids loading of that type of treatment process. Quick history, the feasibility study is, ReGen staff presented it to ReGen board back in 2018. Got the thumbs up to pursue it with M1W. That really came to fruition in 2021 when M1W made commitments to join, and a joint ad hoc committee was formed in November of 2021 and approved an 18-month study for the feasibility study, and hiring a study director and issuing a request for qualifications, request for proposals. The boards approved that, both boards approved that in January of 2022. The study director was onboarded in May of 2022. The RFP was issued in June of 2022. At the same time, there was a solicitation from Cal Recycle on co-digestion that brought the two staffs together. In September of 2022 is when the boards approved the selection of GHG as the consultant. By December, they were under contract and we had our kickoff meeting. And we did the field kickoff meetings and equipment assessment.
When is that one supposed to be done?
So this is the study, and this is what,
Study.
this is what we're looking for, having information to the boards by July.
This is the last item, Leo. This
Okay.
is the last item, so he's leading up to
Okay.
how we get to all that, guys, and they're, that's why I said it's really important, like, the study, the projects, because there's so many of them and they're all kind of intertwined when we're gonna receive that feasibility study. And I think he's setting up the scenario of where does co-digestion fall in the feasibility, and then I have some outlying items of disclosure that I want to share along the way that will help us make a decision on whether we want to pursue this opportunity in co-digestion or not.
Yeah.
So did your opinion that co-digestion might be something that might come to fruition more earlier than some of this other stuff?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, that's why it's being brought.
Yep.
That it's co-digestion, both the wet digestion in a wastewater treatment plant, the dry digestion in an anaerobic digester, or other similar methods has always been part of the study. The vision of the study would evaluate those different options. What has occurred is that this Cal Recycle opportunity for co-digestion, the wet method at the wastewater treatment plant came up for funding in June of this year. And the agencies, both agencies have interest in securing funding. We met around that grant, the Cal Recycle Co-Digestion Grant for wet digestion, and started to jointly evaluate it. So, you know, the initial questions were, is it a single application, a single agency or a joint agency? And it was, you know, quickly identified as a single agency submission. And the scope of the grant is focused on wastewater treatment plants for expanding their capacity of solids treatment of you know, organic solids. So that those organics aren't going to a landfill. And so M1W contracted with a grant writer and had a series of calls in preparing that application. And I attended a number of those calls, and you know, staff discussed their approach through the grant. And so the part of the discussions are around using food waste, and we also identified the possible future condition of having organic fines if MSW was processed in the MRF, that material might be available for a co-digestion approach. So ReGen identified specific tonnages for food waste and MSW fines. We disclosed that those were foreseeable possibilities, but they were dependent on the results of the feasibility study, because the feasibility study is evaluating not one option but multiple options to identify a preferred approach that it has the most benefits to one or both of the agencies.
Quick question, any of this study involve our current contractor that's dealing with our own greenways in terms of what they might be having to do differently in the future?
Well, indirectly, that's defining who does the work comes after defining if the work gets done. The composter is certainly handling food waste, and that food waste was identified as a possible material that could be used for a wet digester approach. So, you know, the composter is potentially going to lose control of that material if they're not part of a pre-processing solution that would be necessary to convert these organics to a slurry. Anyway, M1W has received the grant. They're looking for accelerating the decision around you know, a digestion method, you know, that the feasibility study was tasked with. And so that's where we're presented with today is a request to accelerate an evaluation about co-digestion, the wet version, and you know, advance that for an earlier decision by the boards.
So, you're thinking about pulling this one out of the mix of the other two studies being done and advance this one more quickly? Is that what you're?
Well, the ask is that there be an early decision made about this and basically foreclose on making an evaluation of the other options.
That information to make that decision be available in July?
If it continued, we're being asked to evaluate this in the next month or two.
Or pull it out of the mix and concentrate on this one?
So, I think this is time
This is
time for me to jump in,
yeah,
so.
this is where the communication between the two parties hasn't been ideal.
Yeah, so thank you for the background on that, Guy, I appreciate it. So where we're at now is, do we want, and here's where some of the disclosures come out, I think they're very important. And sorry, I keep looking at my phone, but I have a drawing on a whiteboard that me and Paul Shudo worked on, to try to kind of depict where we're at, so. So you heard a lot about GHD and feasibility, now you have co-digestion. And so, you know, the disclosures that I want to make evident and that I want to make evident not only with our group, finance group and our board, but also with ad hoc. And so, you've heard Monterey One Water, they received a grant and they had a grant opportunity. It's roughly about $4.1 million of grant funding and assets that they received. And they did that, knowingly that potentially, you know, we don't have a set pathway yet, and we were really gonna rely on feasibility to give us that pathway. But there's 4 million reasons why Monterey One Water would want to accelerate this, and that is, one, enhance their current digester system that they have now. It's very dated, you know, it's outdated. It would be a future expense that they can mitigate in cost and liability and, you know, repairs and maintenance. And get this replaced through a grant opportunity, thus putting them with a project and leaving us without a project. And for us to consider is the disclosures before we make a decision on moving forward with the project was very important for me. And that disclosure is, until the board approves us to entertain bypassing feasibility, it's been difficult for us to palette some of the information requests that Monterey One Water has asked without misleading them in the forfeiture of we are participating in this grant opportunity. At this point, we haven't got approval from the board. That's disclosure number one. Two is this a pathway we want to seek? And the reason why I asked that is we've spent about $900,000 forward on this feasibility with all in expenses and the feasibility project between the two agencies, roughly about $450,000 each. So there's a couple items that will happen is co-digestion will run past feasibility, and then we will be in a project with Monterey One Water. They got $4.1 million for the receiving end of the material. We would then pursue grant opportunity for getting the material ready to deliver to those digesters, a delivering system that would be probably a debagger, creating a slurry from the material that would be fed into the digester to help create better gases for energy production for their facility. Unlike the pilot program we have for CETOs, we don't have an early pivot point of 1 year. We are definitely now will be at the realm of the recycling Cal Grant requirements, and that is providing the feedstock, you know, capturing measurements and capturing data throughout that process until those requirements fall off. And roughly it's probably 2025, 2026 period of time. So that means that we would be in this project for that duration of time. Can't back out, we can't take out material. We can't seek the bypass of the feasibility at that time, but our pivot point would come 2025, 2026, roughly, versus like the CETOs that come for 1 year, and then we have a decision whether we want to pursue or not pursue. We would like to have zero to no investment in participation on the project that's applying for Cal Grant, getting a receiving station approved for this. So that is one of the disclosures, is that our pivot point does not come readily at any time that we want. We would have to live through the requirements of the grant. The other one,
Said another way, we'd have to be making a business case decision. You know,
no.
or a wet co-digestion process.
Yeah.
That's what the ask is to close the door on the choices of digestion, whether it be dry or wet.
Perfect.
And
So pivot point will come in 2025. The other item that we identified is the grant application asks for about 30,000 tons of this organic material. And it needs to be food waste. It can't be clean organics because it doesn't make the slurry component that's required of the digester to create good gases.
Right, but it's important that the details are 10,000 tons of food waste is what was identified.
Yes.
We have about 8,000 tons and projected that program will grow. That was the basis for the grant. The other 20,000 tons was forecasted to be in MSW fines that would result after processing waste across the recycling facility. Those were the two items identified, and there are risks associated with those two items that were also disclosed. The food waste tons are not new tons, so if the grant requires new diversion, it's not going to be accomplished by the tons that the district's already been recycling. The MRF fines, the MSW fines, is from a process that the district hasn't made a decision on even doing. And
So thank you for that, Guy. But the disclosure is we have about 9,000 tons, 8,000 tons of food waste that we could participate in the grant with, but it wouldn't meet the full requirement. The agency would have to go out. The requirement, whether if it's new tons or not, would have to be deemed by Cal Recycle. Neither agency can make that determination whether it's new tons or not. It could be considered from the other agency that it's new tons received to them, not new tons from us, but the determination is really gonna come from Cal Recycle. But that's just the disclosure saying, if we participate, here are some of the challenges that we may face along the way in receiving grant funding money, and if we don't meet qualification, we wind up having to pay for those systems out of our pocket, because the grant will not pay out on items that are not meeting the qualifications of the grant. The few remaining items I have is there was also a sole source negotiation from Monterey One Water with Energeria for the assets that would come on. It wasn't a open bid solicitation or a public bid solicitation. They felt they had the opportunity with the grant, so the sole source Energeria to be their third party for equipment to come in as part of that grant. So those are the disclosures that I have. Let's see if I missed anything. The final one I have is when we get the results from feasibility, they may not align with the pathway that we choose. So, you know, the results will be put on standby. We may get a different result, but this is the, you know, the request that I felt it was important to bring, because I don't want it to be the perception that we're not moving as fast as we can to interpret their request for us to become a partner in co-digestion. But it's been probably a 2-month period of us giving position that feasibility had been approved. It's been a pathway that we want to follow unless it's identified, and our first opportunity to put these disclosures is here at this finance committee. And then we'll put these same disclosures at the board for us to make a decision. So at this point,
Decision to do what?
a decision to participate in co-digestion and abandon feasibility for co-digestion. That's pretty much the request that we're
But
having.
we already paid for the other study.
Correct.
well,
So,
but it might reduce some of the study effort, so the cost may come down in the study. But it's basically trying to advance the decision around how to handle organics. Whether they be in a wet digestion approach or a dry digestion approach. And it's, you know, what they ask is because from N1W is because they have the grant, they like this decision made, so they can get direction on where their grant might go, knowing whether ReGen's involved or ReGen's not involved. And, you know, for ReGen to be involved, there needs to be a pre-processing station to create that organic slurry. And, you know, there's probably a $4 or $5 million project there. That's not part of this $6 million project that's happening next door, for which M1W is receiving $4 million in grant funds.
So when they applied for the grant in June of 2022, did it essentially commit us to that portion that supports their grant? And so that's my first question. Second question is, what if we say, well, no, we want to wait until our feasibility study's done to see if this is going to work for us? What does that do to them?
So, the disclosures made to M1W during the grant project was that there were no commitments, that the decision was subject to the feasibility study results. That's been consistent since the feasibility vision was created in 2018, is that the study defines the outcomes. Nonetheless, and you know, the disclosure about new tons, whether they were considered new tons or not, and the disclosure that the fines are from a process that the district hasn't made a business decision to do. Those were all disclosures to M1W in the grant project. They deliberated on the information they were provided, and among their own interests, and their own interests were overriding. For expanding the capacity, that expanding the capacity of that plant, you know, delivers them new equipment, which the plant's ready for, and it is the primary goal of the grant is to expand capacity. As far as a commitment, you know, the tonnage, the scenario that tonnage was available next door was conveyed in the grant. It wasn't conveyed as a commitment, but it could be interpreted as being part of their plan. That if it's not part of their plan, it puts risk, you know, the same risk is why we had the disclosure. It puts risk on whether the grant can be supported, whether the issuing agency will accept accomplishing the project, but not having the waste to go into it.
So they do depend on us.
Well,
They will, like, it's,
The decision we make here will render whether they accept that grant opportunity or not.
okay.
They may have to render it back if we take a position not to support and we.
So the action, let's put it down there, 2-minute warning there.
Okay.
So the action, what we recommend the board is that what is the action? What is the specific thing that
We have to make the determination, do we participate and abandon feasibility result and cut that cost out of our feasibility? Or we decline to be a joint partner in the co-digester project. So those are going to be the two options.
And you'd be recommending the former as opposed to the latter?
I am really seeking your guys' feedback on this. This is definitely a position that we've been strong on. We definitely have other opportunities with Monterey One Water, land being one of them, water solution being another. I think the endeavor really tracks on what is that result, and then there's a risk to it of do we meet the qualifications of the grant? I think is probably the biggest risk that we have is if we don't meet it, then what? And we've used $2 million to put up a $5 million recovery process, right? Because grant's not going to cover the full cost, it'll cover portions of it. We're looking for full coverage, but we haven't applied for a grant, we haven't received it yet. Acknowledgement moves in is now we have to, you know, put staff efforts around the grant and complying with the grant on our end, and then continuing discussions between the two agencies.
Seems like we need to get some important information.
Yep.
Before we make a decision.
Yeah,
We probably, looking back, had we just concentrated on this part of it and not the other stuff, we might be farther ahead at this point.
Well, we can definitely do a little bit of homework around the receiving station, full cost grants. But I think at the end of the day, it's those big disclosures that I mentioned. One is bypass feasibility and abandon and cut out cost there. Pivot point doesn't happen immediately, would happen, post 2025. Feedstock volume is not what is expected, which is what is written into the grant, 30,000 tons. We have about 8,000 tons. I am not interested in trying to run municipal solid waste through the recycling plant. We receive about 2,500 tons a day through solid waste. That plant processes about 300 to 400 tons a day. So there's no way we can keep up that volume and then transition a shift. So we're absorbing a whole bunch of costs to meet a need that's not a need of the district at this point. But the fulfillment of it is very intriguing. If we can make it work, what are the results and what is the benefit? And it is going to require efforts from Keith Day as well, because he's the existing person that's receiving it and processing the material. We're just looking for a stemming of that. And what is that residual? If it's difficult to process food waste, can we create slurry that goes into a digest? So there's gains, but there's also the negative impact of risk to try to enter this a little bit early in the game without knowing the results.
So it's not, this isn't an obvious pathway that you would have come up with.
I think it's we have a couple other agencies. We have.
That was the purpose of the study.
No, I know that.
Because
Yeah,
it's not on
like,
the study.
the study, I know the study's gonna give some information, but just like your gut.
Right.
You know, is this a direction that you'd say like, well, of course we should go in this direction?
Guys, probably the more on the engineer side of what the gut's saying. What I'm seeing is that you do see other agencies are already trying to figure this pathway out with wet and dry digestion. So the equipment and all that, I think it's pretty solid of where it's at. But I don't have enough experience around projects to say, like it says
Right,
to do this.
right.
I'm really at it.
Or this is where the industry's going. And
Yeah,
this is,
yeah.
okay.
A lot of unknowns out there.
Got any final comments before
Yeah.
we wrap up this item? It definitely is an item, and I will try to gather more information that we can add to the disclosures so that we can make a better decision at the time of discussion.
We'll get more information.
Okay, you can make it better. Make a fun one, another presentation.
Yes.
So, yeah,
Yes,
so it sounds like you're asking the board to make a decision. Right?
yes.
And so I suggest it was great conversation. Not sure I'm able to process all the different comments. Would love to see a list of pros and cons for each option. I'm assuming there's at least 2 pathways, maybe 3. Just pros and cons at the bullet point would help me a lot.
And then I'll try to get to the point where I can give a strong recommendation on one or the other. Do my
It's
best.
there.
I'll do my best.
Court roads are.
We're over time already.
Okay.
Felipe, you got any comments?
Yes, I do have, general manager, I just have a few. We do have the invitation for bid module 7, the phase 3 excavation and liner that guy talked about. We received the bid solicitations, on Monday, February 27th of 2023. So we're excited that it's here, it's coming, and we can get, ready to prepare another module. The next item I have is recognition for employee donations. The donations that we've been talking about, the employees together. We were contacted by Interim Inc. was one of the charitable organizations that received funds from the contributions that the employees gathered. And then they were contacted by Interim that they are building an apartment complex for adults with mental disabilities and support independent living and self-sufficiency. This is a great honor that we're getting from them, and we are now going to get a message on a plaque at that facility that's being built, and the message that the social committee solicited from employees and was finally chosen was to inscribe on that, donor plaque or plaque is to, some people look for a beautiful place, others make a beautiful place, and that's from Azra Khan. And that's gonna be the representation of our employees in ReGen Monterey at that facility. So I thought it was something of great interest to share that it's already gonna be utilized for construction of the facility. The third item I have is edible food recovery thank you letters from the Salvation Army. There were recipients of the edible food recovery efforts. And we received 3 letters. They received 3 contributions from the member agencies. And I thought it's a great importance to see the contributions, the difficult times. They mentioned that during the hardships and the disasters and the sickness and the joblessness and the inflation, the contributions couldn't come at a better time. So I just wanted to acknowledge the accolades that came from the Salvation Army letters that we received. The final item I have is we're working on a landfill trial workshop. And we are gonna, there's some members that will stay on a 5/8 schedule. But to resolve some of the issues that we were seeing in the operation, we are gonna offer a 4/10 shift to the second shift on the heavy equipment operators that we have in existence. So some of the reasons behind it is provide better coverage for Saturdays and have enough ATOs to cover a Saturday work. It'll expand the ATO bandwidth by adding 2 hours a shift for landfill maintenance work and project work, which we desperately need now. Is we need some flexibility in not only performing landfilling operations, but everything that requires the maintenance of the landfill itself. We'll look at reducing overtime by making these changes here. And then we will support a better work-life balance for some of the employees that are not getting 2 days off in a row. Now they get a Sunday and a Wednesday or a Sunday and a Tuesday. We can make that adjustment and really get everybody to have at least 2 days off, consecutive days. The trial period will be for about 6 to 12 months is what we identified to the union. And it's to give us a pivot opportunity as well. We don't see the outcomes that we're looking for by making this change. We can revert back to the existing schedules that we have. And that's all I have today.
Can we start a closed session?
Well, yes, we do.
We now have a quorum there.
Okay.
So the closed session is the item listed on the agenda, and we'll have to excuse anybody who's not appropriate for that closed session before we conclude that. So the committee came back from its open session at 10:43. Having taken up the agenda item as listed, there was a brief discussion of the matter. No reportable action was taken. Thank you. There'd be no further action, then the meeting was adjourned.